Hello YouTube, it's Lion here with Hobbies Man once again, and today we're going to be doing another manga review. Today we're going to be looking at the first arc of Bleach. We're going to be looking at the first 70 chapters, which are the Substitute Shinigami arc, the Agents of the Shinigami arc. There's a few different titles, but basically it's the first part of the story where we get introduced to all of the main characters, where we learn about this world, and when we first find our first location to travel to, which is the Soul Society. Now, technically speaking, this is part of the Soul Society, but the Soul Society arc can be split up into 3 different sections, and so that's what we're going to do. So, yeah, Bleach is written by Tite Kubo, or Tite Kubo, I've heard some people say. It sounds kind of weird to say Tite Kubo. It doesn't really sound like a Japanese pronunciation, because usually, unless it's in the middle of the word, the vowel is pronounced. At least that's what I have understood from, my very minimal learnings about Japanese. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It is what it is. But for now, I think I'm going to stick to Tite Kubo because that sounds more correct to me. So, yeah, it's published by Viz. You can read it on the Shonen Jump app, which is where I've been reading it. And this is one of the older titles. So some of the times, the translation or the editing feels a bit off. If you've read Dragon Ball or Naruto, you'll understand that, and that's more or less just kind of how it goes. For some reason, that doesn't really seem to happen all that much with One Piece, but I've also consumed so much One Piece that I might be forgetting it, but the Bleach manga does have that kind of like clunky editing early on. It kind of feels better as you keep going. I don't know if that's because you get used to it or because they did get better at doing it. I'm not too sure, but yeah, the demographic is shonen because it's a Shonen Jump title. And the genres here are mostly urban fantasy. That's what I would consider it to be primarily. I mean, it is in a little city called Karakura, and it is mostly a guy solving supernatural, basically, crime. So I would definitely call it urban fantasy, but it doesn't have, like, what you think of when you think of Western urban fantasy. There's no werewolves, there's no vampires, there's no, what's it called, Romeo and Juliet type romances or anything like that. It's more of just like a spirit detective or something. And it is obviously supernatural because that's basically the same thing as urban fantasy. And there's a lot of action. This is mostly like a 90s or an 80s action hero that fights ghost monsters with a sword. And that's more or less what Bleach is, right? So, yeah, it obviously has an adaptation, which was really popular, and it has just come back recently, which is why I got interested enough in Bleach again to continue reading it. And the premise for this first section is that there's this guy, his name is Ichigo. He is a Japanese guy with bright red or ginger hair, and he ends up having to take over this character's Soul Reaper powers. Her name is Rukia because of an accident that happens in chapter 1, and now he has to use her powers to protect his hometown from these evil ghost monsters called Hollows. And so we get to see the character interact with Rukia and with some classmates as he goes through these early like battles with these hollow creatures. And so the chapter actually ends up having pretty interesting divisions. So the first 25 chapters are more or less the introduction arc, right? So this is mostly a monster of the week type thing. It culminates with this meaningful interaction between Ichigo and a hollow that he knows from his past, because it is part of the reason why he suffered a great loss as a child. His mother died because of this hollow, and he knows this, right? And then there's a kind of intermission and interlude in chapter 26, and then the story continues from 27 to 50 into what I would call like the Quincy thing, which is mostly a battle between Ichigo and another character called Uryu, who are 2 different groups of people, or from 2 different tribes or groups of people that battle these monsters. Ichigo is part of the Shinigami group, which are ghosts that are in charge of getting rid of these monsters. And what they do is they bring them back into the cycle of reincarnation, right? And the Quincy's are humans with supernatural powers that destroy the ghosts, or the monsters, right? So these monsters do not get to go back into the cycle, and so it causes an imbalance, right? So that's that there. And then the last part, 51 to 70, is kind of this runaway situation and this battle between Ichigo and other Soul Reapers, Shinigami, that have come by to take Rukia back to their land, right, to their planet, sorry, to their dimension. And so those are kind of the major plot points and situations that occur, and it's really, really good stuff. Like, actually, there's something about Bleach that's different from Naruto or One Piece, where it's just easy to read. It flows really well, and maybe it's because a lot of it is action pieces or just fun interactions between characters. I'm not sure, but just the way it is easier to read. And I do think it's because it doesn't have to be bogged down by world building, at least in these first 70 chapters, the same way that Naruto or One Piece are, because you're not introducing us to a new world, you're introducing us to basically just a power system. And I think that's really good. As you go on into the story, the bogging down in world building does happen a bit sometimes, but not as much as Naruto or One Piece. So if you're interested in the big three, but you're not really sure about which one to start with, I do think that Bleach is the most accessible out of the three. One Piece is probably the best one, and Naruto is the one that holds nostalgia for the vast majority of people. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. You want to get the best story, you read One Piece. You want to get a story that's consumable and really easy, you read Bleach. And if you want to connect with the wider nerddom in the Western side of things, you should probably read Naruto. And it really just depends on your preference there. But honestly, if you're a beginner, I don't really recommend you start with any of the big three at all, because they're just too big and too large and too unwieldy for the average person. So, yeah. Now let's get into deeper kind of deeper analysis, I guess, or deeper kind of just like step-by-step kind of review or recap of the story. So the introduction to Ichigo and Rukia starts in the first couple chapters. Then Ichigo takes over her powers after he has to help her fight a Hollow in the first episode or the first chapter. He starts battling this Hollow to save his family, and then he starts to battle Hollows for different situations, and mostly it's to save his friends. First, he fights a Hollow to save Orihime, who is his classmate and mostly also his love interest. And then he does it to save Chad, which is his longtime friend and also kind of fellow delinquent character. Then he deals with Kon, who is a mod soul, a engineered soul to take over his body when he is out doing Shinigami work, because his soul is removed from his body so he can go fight Hollows. And so it leaves his body just kind of laying wherever it was. And so Kon is supposed to take over his body and help him deal with the situation, right? But this guy, Kon, actually ends up being a character that has his own kind of agency, which he shouldn't have, but he does. And so it's kind of a difficult situation, but eventually they do figure it out, and Kon becomes one of the allies of the group, right? So, yeah, then he ends up battling the Hollow that killed his mother, which is the big climactic part of the first 25 chapters. And it's a really good fight. It doesn't end, though, and I think that's because it correlates to the second major segment of the storytelling, which is the Weko Mundo or the Arrancar saga, where this saga is the Soul Society arc or saga, whatever you want to call it, right? So, yeah, then there's the Kon interlude, which is a really fun little just kind of side story where Kon, in his now current version, which is a little lion teddy bear, goes around town trying to get picked up by girls and find a new home, but it turns out to not work very well for him, and so he goes back to Ichigo, which is pretty funny. Then the second part of the story starts with Don Kanonji, who is a spiritualist that's on television, and he actually does have actual powers, but he's not actually aware of the correct way to help these spirits pass on, and so he's actually causing problems. And then Ichigo has to step in and help him, and they become kind of friendly with each other. And then the big part here is Uryu fighting with Ichigo, because Uryu is a Quincy. He is a human from a special tribe, I guess, of people that managed to develop their spiritual energy. They managed to harness it in a way so that they could use it to battle hollows, and they actually use it to destroy them, which is in direct contrast with the Soul Society, who return them to the natural cycle of life. And the Quincy's are actually, or have been mostly eradicated because they were doing this imbalance to the world, or to the souls, right, and to the universe. And so Uryu is one of the last Quincy's, and he has a bone to pick with Soul Society people, with Soul Reapers in general, but he specifically just fights Ichigo because he's the closest one to him. So now they have this whole moment where they kind of become friends after Ichigo is like, yeah, we're different, but that's actually what matters here. Watch my back, and we don't have to look at each other. We don't have to like each other, but we're going to work together to end this stupid thing that you started. Because what Uryu does is he creates holobait, and he releases this holobait. And so he causes this issue where thousands of hollows show up to their little town. And it actually gets so bad that a massive hollow shows up, which is called the Menos Grande. And so they have to battle all these hollows, and they also have to fight the Menos Grande. And Ichigo manages to do some good stuff there. So yeah, they eventually manage to settle their grudge, and it's pretty good. I really enjoyed this part of the story. It was really, really good. And then the last part of the story here is two Soul Reapers arrive onto our world in order to take Rukia back, because she has been deemed a criminal for sharing her powers. And so it is their job to bring her back, and also to prepare her for execution. Ichigo doesn't like this, and so he battles them, but loses massively. And then he has a little mini training arc alongside this character called Kisuke Uruhara, who is a secretive, also probably meaningful Soul Reaper character that just kind of lives in their little town and just kind of does shady shit. He's a really good character, though. I like him. And then Orihime Chad also train with this cat person called Yoroichi, and Uryu trains by himself. Eventually, they all end up going to Soul Society to try to save Rukia in the end. So that's kind of where the story ends for this part of the story. And it's really, really good stuff. Honestly, I have read it recently, like last year or almost 2 years ago. I read and watched this part of the story, and I really enjoyed it back then. But rereading it, I think I enjoyed it even more than before. I really liked it. It has this very good flow to it. It's so easy to read. It's so enjoyable. It's so digestible. And I really like it. I think it's really, really good. In terms of characters, we have Ichigo, Karin, and Yuzu, who are all family members. Ichigo's the oldest brother. Karin and Yuzu, I think, are the same age. But they were little girls when their mother died. Yuzu took over the household chores. She decided to be a grown-up about it, and she takes care of the household chores. And Karin mostly sticks to herself and tries to not bother anyone. And then they have their father, who is a very wacky guy, but he tries his best. And then we have Orihime and Tatsuki. And so Orihime and Tatsuki are friends. They're very close female friends. Orihime has a crush on Ichigo. Tatsuki and Ichigo are friends from childhood. Chad and Ichigo are friends. I think in the last couple of years they became friends, but they made a promise to each other, and so they're very tight, right? And then Uryu and Ichigo becomes friends over the course of their little mini arc, and then Rukia and Ichigo develop a bond during these first 70 chapters. That's pretty interesting and pretty compelling. So yeah, my feelings on most of these characters remained the same. I quite like them. I think Chad is my favorite. He's kind of Mexican-ish. Also, he just has a very cool power. He has a very interesting attitude, and I like him a lot. Ichigo is the main character, right? So he's like obviously going to be awesome. But out of the side characters, I think Chad's my favorite. Orihime is so cute and so funny. Rukia is my feelings change on her. Before I just kind of liked her, but now I really like her. I think she's a great character, and she has so many little funny quirks and things like that that are just really, really great, and I like her a lot. Uryu, I dislike more in this arc than I did before, but as I keep reading, because I've already read all of Soul Society by this point, I do think that my feelings on him change a lot, and it's because he initially starts out really shitty, but as it goes on, he gets better and better and cooler, and it's just really, really good and really well done there. So, yeah. In terms of world building, we don't really get that much. I mean, we get the soul powers or the Soul Reaper powers explained. There's like 3 different fighting styles. There's the hand-to-hand combat. There's sword play, and then there's these spells, right? And Ichigo never uses any spells. He really only focuses on fighting with a sword. And we learned that swords are called Shinkai. No, sorry. They're called Sanpakutos. And we learn later that they have 2 forms. And Ichigo's is weird because it doesn't look like the base form of a Sanpakuto, because every sword should look like a katana, but Ichigo's looks like a cleaver because he has to be special and different because he's the main character, right? And then I think the most interesting kind of bits of learning that we get are the Quincy's, Matsos, and Hollows. And then, of course, we start to learn that the Soul Society is a messed up place because these Soul Reapers arrive to kill Rukia basically on the spot. So, yeah, good stuff. I liked it. I think the world building is good. But again, because it is just a urban fantasy, there really isn't too much to work with or too much that you need to explain for the story to handle itself, right? So I really like it. I think it's really well done. In terms of artwork, it starts kind of ugly, but by like the 30th chapter, Tite Kubo has like gotten on his grind, and he does a great job of the artwork from then on, and it gets better and better every time, and it's so satisfying to see the progression of his art style as it goes on, and it's really, really good. By the end of it, you think he's like drawing like models to show off these like outfit designs that he's coming up with. It's really, really well done. I like it a lot. And by 45 to 50 chapters wise, it gets really, really good, and it continues to evolve further and further into the Soul Society. But you do notice that initially when he first introduces a character, they're kind of ugly looking compared to everyone else, but as he gets used to drawing them again, they increasingly get to the same level. But it's not something that I've noticed from any other mangaka where they have a certain style they start with and then they develop it into something else. Usually whatever current style they're working with is how they design their new characters. Like Eiichiro Oda in One Piece, he doesn't introduce characters in the style that he did when he first had started One Piece, right? He introduces them in the current style that he's drawing with. Whereas the new Soul Reapers that arrive at like chapter 50 feel like they're drawn in the style of the first chapter of Bleach instead of the current chapter of Bleach when they show up. So I don't know if that made sense. I hope it did, but yeah, it's just something I noticed. It doesn't really mean too much, but it is, there. It might be noticeable, it might not be, but it was to me. So yeah, other than that, fan service wise, there's just a little bit here and there, not very much. You're not gonna, really find too much. It's not gonna be like the early chapters of Naruto when he's using the sexy jutsu. It's not gonna be scantily clad female characters like in One Piece. There's really not much of that at all, at least in this part of the Soul Society arc. And later on, there is some, but not much. But there is almost nothing in this first part of the story. So, yeah. Other than that, the rating is a 4 out of 5. It was great. It's not amazing, though. And honestly, I do think it's, out of the first 70 chapters of the big 3, I do think this is the best because it is so digestible, not necessarily because it's the best written. I do think Oda's is probably better written, and I do have a soft spot for Naruto, but I think this is the most digestible out of the big 3 in terms of like getting into this far in the story, because 70 chapters is a lot of effort to read. So it's great, but it's not amazing. It doesn't really peak for me, and that's kind of sad because Soul Society is generally understood to be the best part of Bleach. So if, it just kind of sucks, but it is what it is. 4 out of 5. It's really good stuff. I definitely recommend it. If you are interested in the big 3 at all, this is the one to start with. The other 2 you can get into later. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Bleach Substitute Shinigami arc. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know your thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.